Do you know how many times I've heard I don't understand book bleed? Literally on the daily basis. I get those either in comments, in emails, or just people talking to me in general. And I understand completely. It's something that takes a little bit of time to kind of wrap your mind around, but once you understand it, it makes complete sense. Well, today I actually worked with my daughter and we're going to make it super simple for you to understand book bleed. So hopefully you never have another question about it again. So what did we do to really try to make it as simple to understand as possible? Well, I went old school. Coloring books. So what I had my daughter do is color 3 different types of pictures. Shout out to you, Nat. I actually have a link to her TikTok down in the description below. Anyway, we got together and I wanted her to do 3 different types of coloring. The first is when you what we call no bleed, and that is where, I don't know if you can see this, that is where you actually have a white space, a white margin all the way around your illustration. And the reason why you do that is so that way there's a nice clean area, and then you don't need to worry about book bleed because your illustrations aren't going to go all the way to the edges. Now the second type is coloring up to the lines. Okay, so this is what a lot of people want to do when they're doing their illustrations. They want the colors to go all the way to the edge. Okay, here's the problem with that. When print-on-demand companies like KDP, Ingram Spark, places like that, when they create your book, when they cut it, they don't cut it to the exact trim size that you selected. For example, if you pick 8.5 by 8.5, if you go to the Amazon page, go down to the product details, you'll see the actual dimensions is different because when they cut it, they don't cut it precisely to the exact trim size that you selected. So when you only color to the lines, or when you only have your illustrations go to the 8.5 by 8.5, what ends up happening is you could end up with some white space. So how do I make my book the right dimensions? What do I do? Now, to be precise, you want to make sure that you check with whatever site you're using, because each site's bleed may differ a little bit. Also, over time, places like KDP may change their requirements. So the safest thing is to go to that platform and look it up. But as of the recording of this, for KDP, it's 0.125. So why do we want to add the bleed? Why do we want to add that 0.125? Well, it's kind of like if you were to color a coloring book like this. Remember when you were younger and you colored outside the lines? Well, that's kind of what you want to do when it comes to book bleed. In the next segment, I'm going to actually cut these out and you'll see exactly why. Now that I've cut out those pictures, I want to show you exactly how important book bleed is. But before I do, if you haven't been here before, my name is Keith Wheeler, and if you want to continue to get all the hints, tips, and tricks on how to make self-publishing easier, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and smash the little bell icon so you get alerted every time I put out a new video. So if you remember the crab that my daughter colored before, she colored it just to the edges. So if this was a book, it would be like if you had an 8.5 by 8.5 and you did the illustrations just to the 8.5 mark. Well, then what happens is when the print-on-demand company like KDP, for example, cuts the book itself, again, the dimensions aren't going to be exactly 8.5 by 8.5. So when they cut it, if you only went, make sure you can see this, if you only go to the edges, then what happens is when they cut it, you have all this extra white space, okay, which does not make for a good book. If you remember the shark picture that my daughter colored in, she actually colored outside the lines. And what happens is because she colored outside the lines, which is the equivalent to using the 0.125 book bleed that KDP asks for, when they cut it beyond the 8.5 by 8.5 dimensions that you've set, you still have nice, crisp color. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you still have nice crisp color even beyond the actual trim size. So just before you ask, no, you're not going to have a black line or anything like that on your book. That's just, obviously for the illustration. But again, that's why book bleed is so important. The bottom line is if you want your pictures to go all the way to the edge of your book, then what you need to do is make sure that you select with bleed when you're setting it up in the print-on-demand platform that you're using. For your interior, you're going to include, as of the recording of this for KDP, it's going to be 0.125 inches to the top, to the bottom, and to the outside, whether that's left or right, depending on what page you're working on. When it comes to your cover, your book bleed is going to be all the way around the perimeter of your book. I hope this illustration makes book bleed a lot easier to understand. If you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the comments below. But if you did find that helpful, make sure that you give this a like, and hey, don't let the learning stop there. Check out this video right here. It's one of my favorites. But if you've already seen that one, then check out this one that YouTube says you're going to love. I'll catch you next video, and remember to write right.